I take a deep breath and try to control the tremor in my voice. Even now, after all this time, when I close my eyes, those scenes flash before me. It was Christmas Eve, and the falling snow seemed determined to bury everything under a heavy, white blanket. There were 4 of us, me, Max, Sarah, Jack, and Ryan. We were all filled with excitement and, of course, a little fear, as we decided to go to the Blackwood house. That same abandoned house whose terrifying stories were on everyone's lips. They said that one Christmas Eve, the entire Blackwood family, the parents and their 2 children, Emily and Jack, had vanished without a trace. It was as if the earth had opened up and swallowed them whole. Only a decorated pine tree and a pile of untouched presents beneath it remained. Ever since then, they said their spirits wandered the house, and on Christmas nights, the sound of children crying and their parents' whispers could be heard. We wanted to see if these stories were true. When we arrived in front of the house, an eerie silence hung in the air. You wouldn't think it was Christmas Eve, and everyone was celebrating. The house's windows were dark and cold, covered in a thick layer of snow. I carefully opened the door, a loud creak echoed, and we stepped inside. The smell of dust, dampness, and something else, an unpleasant odor I can't quite describe, filled the air. It was dark everywhere, with only a faint light filtering in from outside. We moved slowly through the house. Suddenly, we heard a sound from upstairs. It was the sound of a child crying, softly saying, "Mummy, Daddy." Goosebumps erupted all over us. We knew it was the same sound we'd heard in the stories. I, always trying to appear brave, said, "We should go upstairs." The others followed me with hesitation and fear. When we reached the top floor, we saw a strange sight. In the middle of the room stood a large pine tree decorated with colorful lights. Beneath the tree were many presents, still unopened, just like in the stories. But what truly frightened us were the shadows moving on the walls. Shadows shaped like people, as if the spirits of the Blackwood family were there. Suddenly, the lights on the tree began to flicker and the child's crying grew louder. The shadows on the walls began to dance, as if they were trying to show us something. The whispers became clearer, as if they were talking to each other. We couldn't take it anymore. We screamed in terror and fled the house. We never went back to that house again, but from that night on, every year on Christmas Eve, when the snow falls and the town grows silent, they say the sound of a child crying can be heard from the abandoned house at the end of the street, a sound that is a reminder of the night when joy and celebration turned into horror and nightmare. I can still hear that sound in my ears, and I still tremble when I think about it. I'm Sarah, and this is a story I'll never forget. A night that was supposed to be filled with joy and celebration turned into a terrifying nightmare. It was New Year's Eve, and we, a group of close friends, had gathered at Jim's big, old house. Despite its age, the house was very warm and welcoming, and with the festive decorations, it had a truly joyful atmosphere. Until that night, no strange or unusual events had occurred in this house or neighborhood. Everything seemed calm and normal. It was past midnight, and the party was in full swing. Soft music was playing. The sounds of laughter and conversations filled the air, and everyone was enjoying being together. Suddenly, in the silence between 2 songs, the sound of knocking on the door came, a loud and unexpected sound that made everyone quiet and look towards the door. Mike volunteered to open the door. With some hesitation, he went to the door and opened it. But what he saw made his blood run cold. There was no one behind the door. Mike, who was quite scared, looked outside, but he didn't see anyone. A cold wind blew in from outside and caused the candle flames to flicker a little. Mike returned with a confused and anxious look and told us that no one was behind the door. At first, we all thought maybe we misheard or someone was trying to play a prank. But a few minutes later, the sound of knocking came again, this time louder and repeatedly. This time Sarah, went to the door. I cautiously opened the door and saw the same scene again. No one was there, but this time, something was different. I felt a cold, invisible hand touch my shoulder. Out of fear, I let out a short scream and jumped back. Fear and terror spread among all of us. No one thought it was a joke anymore. We all knew something unusual was happening. In turn, we all went to open the door. Each time, no one was behind the door, but each time, something stranger happened. One felt a cold breath on the back of their neck, one saw a shadow in the corner of their eye, and one heard incomprehensible whispers. The fear had reached its peak. We all knew an invisible and evil force was in the house. Suddenly, the lights went out and everything went dark. The sound of screams and shouts rose. When the lights came back on, we saw an even more terrifying scene. One of our friends, David, had vanished. We couldn't stay there for another moment. We all rushed out of the house and called the police right there. It took a long time. About an hour later, the police arrived. We told them what had happened, but they didn't believe us at first. They searched the house, but no trace of David was found. It was as if he had melted into the ground. The police wrote a report and left, but we knew that something very strange had happened there. From that night on, that house was abandoned forever, and the story of that terrifying night spread by word of mouth. They say David's spirit still wanders in that house, and every year on New Year's Eve, the sound of knocking comes from that house, a sound that is a reminder of the night that joy and celebration turned into horror and an eternal nightmare. Even now, when I think about that night, my body trembles. That feeling of a cold hand on my shoulder, I will never forget it. I'm Emily, and I'll never forget that Christmas night. A night that was supposed to be full of laughter and joy turned into a terrifying experience. It was Christmas night, a few days before New Year's. We, a group of friends, had gathered at Martin's big, cozy house. Martin always threw the best parties. For entertainment, we decided to watch a horror movie. We had turned off the house lights, and only the light from the TV illuminated the room. We were all engrossed in the movie when suddenly, we heard the sound of running water. At first, we thought it might be the sound of snow hitting the window from outside. Martin paused the movie, and we listened to the sound for a few moments. The sound was clear, but not loud enough to be worrying. We decided to resume the movie. After a few minutes, the sound became louder again. This time, it couldn't be ignored. Julian listened carefully and said, "That sound is coming from upstairs." A heavy silence fell over the room. We all knew that no one was upstairs and no faucet should be running. Fear slowly crept into all of us. With hesitation and fear, we all went upstairs together. The sound of running water grew louder with each step. When we reached the upstairs bathroom, the sound was coming from right there. We cautiously opened the door and were met with a strange sight. The faucet was on, and water was pouring out with high pressure. But no one turned this on, Emily said in a trembling voice. At that very moment, before our astonished eyes, the faucet turned off by itself, and the sound stopped. A moment of absolute silence filled the air. No one knew what to say or think. Filled with fear and terror, we all hurried back downstairs. No one was in the mood to watch the movie anymore. The atmosphere in the house had completely changed. After this incident, the terrifying events began. First, strange noises came from upstairs. The sound of footsteps, something being dragged across the floor, and even laughter. Then, things in the house began to move. Suddenly, a book would fall off the shelf, a picture would tilt on the wall, or a door would open by itself. Once, when Chris had gone to the kitchen to get a drink, he suddenly returned with a loud exclamation. He had seen all the kitchen cabinet doors opening and closing. Fear and terror had reached their peak. No one could stay there anymore. We decided to leave the house as quickly as possible and spend the night somewhere else. But when we tried to leave through the front door, it was locked, and no matter what we did, it wouldn't open. That night, we were trapped in that cursed house until morning and experienced terrifying events that we will never forget. The impact of that experience was so profound that even in our own homes, we felt fear and anxiety at night, constantly worrying that such an event might happen to us again.